This is Dateline News and Conversation. I have a very special guest tonight. I met him a little less than a month ago at a roundtable, a forum in Simferopol. He's the director of Tavria's Center for Information and Analyses in Moscow. He has a PhD in political studies. His interests are U.S.-Russia relations, electoral politics, and information warfare. There's much more to his background that I will post in the description of this show. But I'm very, very happy to welcome to the show Alexander Bedritskiy. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Regis. Nice to hear you.
Oh, it's very good to see you, and I'm so happy after so much trials and tribulations with my internet connection, I finally got it solved. Now, Alexander, at this conference that we both attended in Simferopol at the Crimean Federal University, the topic was Yalta, Yalta Conference 80 years out. People were talking about the possibility of a Yalta 2. But the conversation was really about peace between the United States and Russia and whether it's possible. So I will ask you this right off the bat. As a professional, what are your views on the possibility of peace between the United States and Russia? And a lot has happened in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So tell me what your thoughts are about the possibility and the probability of peace.
You see, the item you just stressed is rather complicated, and it can be divided into several narratives. First of all, if we try to compare present situation with peace conference of 1945, we will see definite differences in between the situation. First of all, 80 years ago, it was a peace conference in between winners. The second one is that all the sides, I mean, Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill, understood quite well that contradictions in between countries will not disappear immediately after the war with Germany and after the victory. And then they tried to establish long-term peace, knowing that their contradictions, their points of view are different, and despite of this, they tried to establish long-term peace. As we can see, none of the conditions is applicable to the present time. Possible negotiations, so those negotiations that already started are in between enemies, or at least if we are not going to say so strong, not by enemies, but not by friends, not by winners. We are in the process of conflict of our countries, even if it is a proxy war, but nevertheless it is a war, and people are dying, and they are killed in the war. Then I don't think that in this phase of the conflict we can establish a long-term peace in between our countries. First of all, because I mean, Russia and the United States, as well as Europe, are rather strong. And I should make one more remark, because Ukraine is not a part of the war in this case. It is just an instrument in hands of of Western countries. So it is a conflict in between Western countries and Russia. And all the sides of the conflicts feel rather confident in this situation. They have some abilities, some forces to continue struggle. So I don't think that in this situation, when all the sides are ready to defend their values, their views for the future, are able to come to any long-term deal. And moreover, even if Russia and the United States will meet any agreement on this conflict, there is absolutely no guarantees that Europe will support the United States position, or Ukraine will support it, or even if after 4 years of Trump presidency, we cannot say that another one president will continue the same line toward the Russia.
Okay, Alexander, that was pretty clear. I think people are going to really understand the difference between Yalta 80 years ago, between Churchill, FDR, and Stalin. You said the biggest difference today is um, the talks are not between the winners of a war, but between enemies. And I would
Sure.
agree with you. As an American living here in Russia, I would not soften that word at all. And I would go further to say that the war in Ukraine is a war of the United States against Russia with its vassals in Europe. And I agree with you. And I think many more people do agree now that Ukraine has just been a proxy. It's been the soccer field, the playground on which this war against Russia is being fought. Now, you mentioned deal. Everybody in the West, in the United States, is talking about Trump and his promise to make a deal to end this conflict. Well, he said on the first day in office, but that is long gone. And then it was 30 days, and now it was 60. Um, I want to ask you this question about a deal. You are a Russian. You are the director of a think tank. And I have to assume that think tanks in Russia and Moscow have to be similar to what think tanks in Washington, D.C. do. They provide uh, analysis, they provide information, and they provide policy recommendations. Now, if I'm correct in assessing that about you and your role, do you think that people in the Kremlin, that Putin has to make a deal given the situation on the ground and Russia's main goals for this special military operation? I don't think Putin has to make a deal, but I want to hear it from an expert. What do you think, Alexander?
Okay, before I shall start to asking your question, just few remarks. My think tank not in Moscow but in Crimea.
Okay.
And another one, I was to the US twice, and I should say you that most Americans, maybe a political class that in New York or Washington, D.C., they are rather different, but Americans are rather similar to Russians. And I like Americans, just common Americans, and I don't suppose they are our enemies. Our enemies are in Washington, D.C., or in New York, or in San Francisco, in all other big cities, but not all the Americans at all. So now, what Trump supposed to present as a deal? he he doesn't know himself what exactly he wants to present. He jumps from one item to another one, from one issue to another one, but he cannot present anything credible for the negotiations. But can you imagine a situation when the Russian government or Mr. Putin will deny the peace talks with Trump? the West will still be united. But in this situation, Europe tries to oppose Trump, oppose the United States policy. Ukraine is rather disappointed, and Mr. Zelensky is trying to establish separate links with Europeans, with Trump. He is nervous. He doesn't know what to do. So these negotiations is a kind of game in between United States and Russia. I am not sure, or I don't know, if Trump really believes that he is able to reach all the goals of the deal, even if he knows them. I mean, goals. But it is a kind of game, and one of the aims of the game of Trump is to reload responsibility from the United States to Europe in this conflict. In this situation, he can say that, okay, we did everything we could, but now it is a problem of Europe and Ukraine and Russia. So it is mostly it is a matter of domestic policy, a United States domestic policy rather than foreign policy. He is trying to solve long-term problems of the United States. Those problems that started after the Cold War, that Bush Jr. Could not solve in the beginning of the century, but later Barack Obama, who's supposed to provide several very unpopular reforms, medical, educational, social security, he didn't do anything in this field. And now United States suffer from those long-term and long-lasting problems, and nobody is going to help. And his opponents in the United States, um, in um, in some ways, we can name the Trotskyists because they use approximately the same ideology, and they assess the United States as just lamps to timber to the forest of worldwide revolution. They're trying to establish new rules that offend human rights. I mean, real human rights of all the people of the world. They're trying to establish minority rights, or not establish, but to provide minority rights, but by the cost of majority. It's not a democracy at all.
Yeah, I want to follow up on a couple of things. Donald Trump, in his public statements, even in his first term, were definitely hostile, if I can use that word, towards NATO and the EU. Now, in his second term, just since January 20th, a little over a month, he has been even more vociferous in his condemnation of NATO and the EU. Um, do you think that he's just saying that for his domestic audience? He sure as heck has got people in Europe very upset and worried. But what are your thoughts on whatever he's doing, whatever his plan is vis-a-vis the EU and NATO?
You see that, okay, I don't know how to name them. His opponents in the United States are very influential in Europe as well. And even in his first term, he tried to increase European countries' spending for NATO, but he failed that time. As well, we can remember that it was exactly Trump who closed Russian consulates in the United States, and Marco Rubio, present State Secretary, was backing an idea to militarize Ukraine, and he supported the military assistance to the Ukraine even in that time. So he is not friend of Russia, and I think that it is clearly understandable in Russia now.
Wow. You know what a lot of people are talking about is that Trump is trying to set a trap for Putin. What are your thoughts? Other people have said, no, no, Vladimir Putin is much smarter, much more experienced than Trump, and he's the one trying to set a trap. Do you think there's a trap being set by either side?
Uh, I think that Trump is rather experienced, but in another field. He's a businessman, he's showman, but he's not a politic. And now he's rather short of time. He has only 4 years ahead. 4 years or at least 3 years, because after 3 years another campaign, election campaign will start. So he should, in this term, he should clear the ground or dry the swamp, as he said in the first time of his presidency, from globalists, and to set on the positions his allies or members of his team. But if those people whom he suppose as his team are really support him, or they can change their mind after Trump. So it is a question.
Yeah. Um, as a Russian, as a scientist, geopolitical scientist and analyst, um, if I can ask you, what do you think is going on in the mind of Vladimir Putin um, when he is watching what is unfolding? I know that he and Sergei Lavrov have said in the past it doesn't matter who the American president is. They understand it's the system. But what do you think is going on in the minds of Putin and Lavrov and others in the Kremlin as they watch this last month and a few days unfold?
Any war ends. It doesn't matter when, but it ends. So all the aims of this war were clearly and loudly announced. First of all, it is demilitarization of Ukraine. It means that Ukraine should be neutral and out of any military alliance. Then denazification. What does it mean? Because all those phrases that were said 3 years ago are not, I'm pretty sure that they are not clearly understandable in the Western countries. So it means that the oppression of Russian population should be stopped in Ukraine, that Ukraine should avoid uh, any oppression of national minorities, that Russian language should receive the status of official language in the Ukraine, that Russian Orthodox Church should be reestablished in its rights. But is it possible in this situation in Ukraine? I am not sure, because it can be done only if a responsible government will come to power in the Ukraine. But there are too many groups and too many weaponized groups in Ukraine that will oppose it. We can remember Minsk agreements. And can you imagine the situation when any, it doesn't matter whether it was Poroshenko or Zelensky, would have tried to implement those agreements. He would have been dismissed in a minute in Ukraine. So it means that war is still on. And I don't think that Russia will stop this war. And it was said once again by a Russian government, Russian leadership, quite clearly that there will be no temporary ceasefire. We are going to establish a long-term peace in Europe. We are interested in it. We are not harm for European countries, neither for Ukraine. We can remember the situation in 2013 and 2014, early 2014, when Russia did absolutely nothing, when Ukraine tried to sign an agreement with the European Union, and only the coup d'etat in Kiev led to further events.
So Russia, as you have mentioned repeatedly, has stated that it has three main goals for the special military operation. The demilitarization of Ukraine, the denazification of Ukraine, and the complete neutrality of Ukraine. Goal number one, I think, can be accomplished and probably is close to being accomplished. The demilitarization, therefore the defeat of Ukraine. I happen to believe that that's not too far off into the future. But Alexander, the second goal, denazification. As I understand, the influence of Stepan Bandera and others goes back 80 years, especially in Western Ukraine, where a certain, maybe, I don't know if it's a majority of the people, but a large number have been indoctrinated in this nationalistic neo-Nazi ideology. Now, if that's one of Russia's goals, I can only imagine, Alexander, that that's going to take a few decades of re-education. What are your thoughts on that particular goal of denazification?
You see, there was the same problem with Germany after the Second World War, when practically all the population of Germany was under nationalistic or Nazi propaganda. But situation changed in western or in eastern part quite rapidly after the war, in just a few years, in 5 or 6. So I hope that it can be done in Ukraine in this situation as well. But I said it, and I am saying it once and once, and in all the formats when I can, that the worst thing that happened in Ukraine since 2014 is that those kids or those children who were just 10 years in the time of Euromaidan are now fighting with weapon against my country. This is the worst.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you specifically, does Russia have to make a deal to end this conflict with the United States?
Uh, I will say you I will try to avoid a direct answer from to your question, because Russia should support any negotiations. They should be they should participate in all the peace talks with the United States, but it should stand on its own positions in this case. And once again, maybe the US is are more interested in the peace solution rather than Russia in the once again in this very moment, because for Trump it is crucial to clear the space in his own country for forthcoming reforms, for forthcoming development. Trump is trying to avoid from Ukraine conflict. He's trying to replace responsibility to Europe, but is he able to do it or not? It's not clear.
I'm going to keep pressing you a little bit on this. Uh, I don't see where there's any room for Russia, Vladimir Putin, to compromise on any of those three goals we've just talked about. Now, Donald Trump has said something that I think if he really understands what he said, is critical. He has said, and I'll have to paraphrase, that the root cause of this problem was not 2014. The root cause of the problem goes back to at least as far as 1991, and
Sure.
the 1-inch promise of Secretary of State James Baker to Gorbachev that NATO would not advance. And in terms of what Russia wants for a European or a Eurasian security agreement, NATO needs to back off. And Trump has even alluded off cuff, maybe, that he thinks maybe NATO should pull back. What are your thoughts?
Definitely, you're right, completely right. Because if we remember the time of 80s or 90s, late 80s, when Soviet Union was on the edge of the collapse and Soviet bloc already collapsed, there was a huge discussion in the West uh, whether they need NATO anymore, because there is no enemy. So what is the aim for military bloc? And NATO is not a gentleman club. It's not just a club for interests. It is a military bloc, which and when William Clinton decided to to start enlargement of NATO. Definitely Russia opposed that, but that time it was rather weak. And the first ring was during the Munich conference in 2007 when Mr. Putin made his speech, famous speech, but nobody was ready to hear him that time. And but those words were continuing to Mr. Putin or other Russian officials continued to repeat them all those years since 2007. And there were many waves of NATO enlargements, and it is a kind of organization that can exist only when it extends. They need expansion. When the expansion stops, it means that NATO doesn't have any sense anymore. Because what shall it protect? Now they can say that we are going to protect new member countries. From whom? We can remember those speeches of early 10th that it's not about Russia. It is mostly we are trying to defend from North Korea or Iran, but now we see the truth that all the preparations were done just against Russia. And we can also remember the initiatives of December 2023, Russian initiatives for European security. But who paid any attention for them? Nobody. And in February of 2024, all Russian views and Russian interests were completely ignored when Zelensky said that he is not going to implement Minsk agreements, and Europe and the United States were continuing to weaponize Ukraine. What were other solutions rather than to start military operation against that regime that was not able to implement the agreements that were made before?
Alexander, I would like to follow up on a few things that we've been discussing. Uh, you mentioned Trump and how he viewed this war. I'm going to be really specific. He has said repeatedly, this is not his war. This is Sleepy Joe Biden's war. Now, if he really believed that, wouldn't you think that he really just could walk away by saying no more aid of any kind to Ukraine, demanding that Europe and NATO send no more money or weapons to Ukraine? He could demand that all unofficial representatives from the United States and NATO leave. And if he did that, he could just walk away. He wouldn't have to get involved as he is now in getting dragged down in this diplomatic public spat firefight with Zelensky and with Europe. Don't you think he could just walk away?
He can. He can, at least he wants to do it. You see, it's rather a tricky question you stressed right now because let's imagine a situation if this war would have occurred in the time without nuclear weapons. It meant that Russia would have been in a state of war with all the Western countries, direct war, like in Crimean War in 19th century. And now you can imagine a situation if the United States will disappear or uh, will not continue the struggle with Russia around Ukraine. It could lead to the situation when some European countries will decide to be involved directly in the war with Russia. Not, it is quite possible. It is quite possible. Let's say Great Britain and Poland, which is supported by Britain. France under Macron is also possible because Macron suppose that he tried to talk to Mr. Putin in 2022 and he failed that time. So and 23. So he can decide that now he he can rearrange about the situation. And what I think Trump is going uh, to de-escalate, not de-escalate the situation, but Trump is going to make some conditions for the United States to go out from the conflict, from the direct conflict with Russia. At least it's very dangerous situation when two biggest superpowers with nuclear arsenals are posing in such manner like now. And once again, Trump has a lot of domestic problems that he should solve in his own country. So even if the agreement, a deal will be reached in between Russia and the United States, there is absolutely no way that the war will stop. And that Europe will support this position of two big states, I mean Russia and the United States, and Ukraine, that is backed by Europe, will stop fighting. So it's rather complicated situation. Definitely Trump's tries.
Yeah. Here's my take as an American living here now for 5 years and being very anti-American imperialism. I'm very anti-American foreign policy and what America has been doing in the world for at least the last 80 years and more. But I see Europe as being very weak,
Sure.
very impoverished right now. I mean, with the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines and the sanctions that Europe, in addition to the United States, placed on Russia, they've shot themselves right in the head. I mean, from what I read, their economies are all really in real trouble. worse than recession, maybe depression. Uh, Trump is showing them no respect. But which one? UK is reporting that they can't even recruit enough soldiers for their army. Their once formidable navy is no more. And so to me, UK is a paper tiger. The same thing goes for France. I mean, Macron wants to march into Ukraine with his soldiers. Uh, he's got to be crazy. I mean, I think he's playing to. Um, I don't know who he's playing to. And then if you look at Germany, Germany is nothing what it was before. From what I read, its military industrial complex is not able to even keep up with the need that Germany has for itself. So, from my perspective, I think this talk of different countries in Europe, come on, Denmark, Norway, give me a break, the Baltics, Poland. Oh my God. I mean, it's ridiculous in my opinion, but I do agree. And I do think that Trump can just walk away. I don't think that Russia has to worry about any remnants of the EU coming in. But I want to ask you about NATO, and you said it was a military bloc. The Western and United States explanation of NATO is a defensive organization. Now, as a Russian, when you hear that NATO is defensive, I have to ask
Mm,
I have to ask you this. I
Definitely, there were. I read official NATO documents, and I know that it is a defensive organization. But telling the truth, being plain, it is a military bloc and offensive military bloc.
Yeah. And so what I was going to add is for the last many years, this military bloc, backed and supported and mostly funded by the United States, has been exercising massive war games all along Russia's borders, and now even up into Norway and Sweden and in the Arctic. Annual war games, gaming, practicing a first strike nuclear attack on Russia. The, these are the really unstated goals, but that is really what's happening. And so the question I have to ask you, Alexander, as a Russian, as a geopolitical analyst, I think as a Russian patriot, when you look at these annual war games right on your borders, how can you think that NATO is anything but a military bloc designed to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia? And I use strategic defeat because that's what Joseph Biden has been saying for the
It is
last
an
year or
official
two.
point. It is an official position. Yes.
So what are your
So there is no matter to discuss. It was officially said that Russia is a strategic enemy for NATO. And in all the doctrinal documents of the United States and NATO, it is written clearly that Russia is an enemy.
so
Uh,
as a geopolitical analyst and the director of a think tank, when you consider what we've been talking about so far this evening in this conversation, Russia knows exactly what the position of the United States and NATO and the EU is. And I have to ask you this: do you think Russia really believes they can change?
it can change. because who could have imagined that Nazi Germany would have changed in just 5 years, in the period from 1941 till 1945, but it changed, and it was the result of the war and the defeat of Germany. So it can change.
So, so with the defeat of Ukraine, and you and I both agree that this is not about defeating Ukraine. It really is about defeating when Ukraine crumbles, when Ukraine can quote unquote fight any longer, waves a white flag. You and I both know it's not Ukraine that lost, it was NATO, the EU, and the United States of America. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Uh,
Uh, okay.
Go
Uh,
ahead. Go
I'm
ahead, because people, my viewers, who are very sympathetic, okay, they're very pro Russian. And I think they need to hear it again and again from a Russian perspective. And I want to hear you say it again. Germany, after this massive defeat, in a matter of 5 years, changed. And I think you might be saying that after the defeat of the United States, the EU, and NATO in Ukraine, which is pretty obvious that it's happening right now, do you think they might change? At least the European Union might change.
European Union is changing already, because when on the beginning of the conflict, it was okay. It appeared to be superpower or world power, but now it's rather a weak organization with not clear perspectives in the future. Just in 3 years, everything changed. But you see, two big powers, it doesn't matter whether those countries are just people, common people, two big powers are able to find a common language for themselves. But the most dangerous situation if you have a weak enemy. It is just like a rat in a corner. It can jump on you in any moment. So the most dangerous thing in this situation, I see if Europe will be too weak to continue, let's say, diplomatic, to continue a neutral policy. And it is the most dangerous thing in this situation. If the United States quit the conflict and will leave Europe just in front of the conflict around Ukraine, just as is with Russia, it can lead to great European war without the United States. United States can be involved in this war on later stages, as it happened in the First and the Second World War, but not immediately.
You know, I have a Russian friend. He's born in Russia. Family immigrated to the United States when he was very young. So he was educated through high school, 2 university degrees. He joined the United States military, United States Army, was a tank battalion commander. I think he retired as a major. He returned to Russia and he's living in Moscow and he's doing a podcast. He's been a guest on my show several times, and I've been a guest on his show. But you know what he told me? He he thinks that Russia will be at war with all of Europe within the next 10, 15 years. What are your thoughts about that?
I hope You see, I'm rather optimist, or I'm trying to be an optimist in this situation. I think that there is way to avoid a great European war, but but the danger is really big. It's big enough, and the perspective is not so clear if we are able to avoid it or not. And mostly it depends on the ability of Europeans, not only European leaders or leaders of European countries, because we should divide Brussels bureaucracy, European Union bureaucracy, and leadership of definite European countries, which is rather different. And Brussels bureaucracy stays on the globalistic positions, and they protect. They are very close to position of Biden administration, much closer than leaders of separate European countries. So it depends on the prospects of the European Union. If this organization, rather weak nowadays, uh, can continue in the forthcoming years, or it will disappear and European countries or old European countries will appear again as great European powers. And one more thing, very important thing, that those countries that we assessed as the second level last years can be moved to the first position in the future world, like Poland in Eastern Europe. And we can remember Polish history when it was a central power in Europe in 16th or 17th century, and Turkey in the southern flank, which has very very big ambitious, not only in the region of Ottoman Empire, but also in Central Asia, in Middle East, uh, in Ukraine, by the way, in northern Black Sea. So the world without superpowers or polar world will be more dangerous than this one.
Yeah. And I do want to follow up with you on future shows about this multipolar world, BRICS, and the role of Turkey. These are all very important things that must be considered when one looks at the larger geopolitical landscape. So I'm looking forward to discussing many of these things with you. Uh, I am very optimistic myself, and I'm really hoping that Trump is not all just hot air and bluster. That he does want to reestablish relations with Russia. And I want to end on this note, Alexander. As I've been watching what's been unfolding in the last couple of weeks, there was that emergency meeting, very quickly organized meeting between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio and other high ranking people. And that meeting was supposed to lay the groundwork for a future summit between Putin and Trump. But what we just saw was another high level meeting in Istanbul.
Mhm.
And we're probably never going to know the details of what was going on in both of those. But one of the things they made very clear is, and it's a concrete uh, objective, the reopening of embassies and consulates in both countries to full staffing. Alexander, I don't care if anything else happens, but for me, opening relations again and embassies and consulates and Trump and Putin speaking directly, for me, is a giant step back from the brink of nuclear annihilation. And
Absolutely.
if there's any hope that I have, it's at least these two countries now are talking again. And
Absolutely.
maybe we don't have to use the term enemy anymore. We
I
might
hope
be
so.
able to use one of Trump's favorite terms is competitor. What are your thoughts?
I'm completely agree with you. And now the situation is very dangerous because all the communication links are destroyed in between two major superpowers, and it is a dangerous situation for the whole world. And the minimum what should be done is to re-establish them, and not only official, I mean, not only diplomatic links in between embassies and consulates, but also in between experts in politics and military. We should discuss because those links were existing all the time during the Cold War, even in the worst time, they were existed.
Do you
So
think,
it is a crucial for our relationships.
yeah, do you think that during these last 4 years, there may have been contact between somebody in the Pentagon and somebody in Russian military or in the Kremlin? Do you think there might have been these backdoor secret communications, or do you think everything was definitely cut off?
I am absolutely positive that there is a kind of hidden level in these peace talks. All the official meetings should be prepared, and it means that experts already met or have met and discussed some details of the official negotiations. So re-establishment of such links is very important for both countries. And I'm 100% positive that such meetings already provided.
So I want to make one more point. Um, Donald Trump is a businessman. He's not a seasoned diplomat or politician. He may be learning politics very quickly. Marco Rubio is not a seasoned diplomat by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, there doesn't appear to be anybody in the United States who has any real training or experience in diplomacy. Contrast that with Sergei Lavrov. Alexander, I would not want to be sitting across the table from Sergei Lavrov in any kind of a diplomatic situation. And the same goes for Putin. Do you see this as a hindrance, or do you see it maybe as an opportunity for Russia?
It is an opportunity for all the sides. And we are not discussing definite persons. They are very important. But nevertheless, mostly any negotiations, any peace talks is a kind of team job, teamwork. So it means that not only Marco Rubio, who is a very experienced politician, he is not pro-Russian and never been. I can remember the time when he opposed Russia in all his speeches, but nevertheless, he is quite experienced. And comparing with Hillary Clinton, was she a career diplomat or not? She wasn't. But she was a secretary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Alexander, listen, I can't thank you enough. It's so good to have you on the show. There are so many topics that I want to discuss with you. We've mentioned some of them, Turkey, a multipolar world, BRICS, Russia's role in this emerging new world order, uh, and so many other things that I haven't been able to have these discussions with others, but especially with a Russian with your background, your knowledge, and your experience. So I'm going to look forward to having you back again as often as
Thank you,
you're
Regis.
able.
Thank you. Thank you, and I hope we will meet soon.